They tell you it's a meritocracy. Work diligently, save judiciously, and you can ascend the social and economic ladder. The American dream, they claim, is accessible to anyone prepared to strive for it. Why then does wealth seem to be accumulating at an unprecedented pace? Why do the affluent amass greater riches while everyone else consistently falls further behind? In 1980, the wealthiest 1% commanded approximately 7% of the nation's wealth. Today, that figure stands at a staggering 32%. This isn't attributable to a sudden surge in their work ethic, nor superior intellect or innovation. Rather, it's a consequence of a deliberate re-engineering of the system, designed to facilitate an upward transfer of wealth. Once you truly comprehend how this mechanism operates, you'll quickly discern that this isn't merely an unfortunate accident or a glitch in the market. It is, in fact, the intended design. The affluent amass greater riches because the very rules of the game are meticulously skewed in their favor. Conversely, the less fortunate find themselves falling further behind, as every single rule, policy, and even crisis appears to be strategically engineered to extract resources from the bottom strata and funnel them directly to the top. This narrative transcends individual successes or failures. It's about a meticulously crafted machine, a wealth extraction mechanism, that has been operating relentlessly for decades. And, regrettably, you are the primary fuel that powers it. To begin, let's examine its most fundamental operational mechanism, the stark contrast between asset inflation and wage stagnation. Since 1971, when President Nixon severed the dollar's connection to gold, the government effectively gained the unfettered ability to print an unlimited supply of money. And print they did, conjuring trillions of dollars seemingly out of thin air. Crucially, however, this newly created money wasn't distributed to the general populace. Instead, it predominantly flowed into the financial system. This inflow directly inflated the prices of stocks, bonds, real estate, essentially every asset class predominantly owned by the wealthy. If you happened to own assets in 1980, you were positioned to win decisively. Your home likely tripled in value. Your stock portfolio experienced exponential growth, and your investment properties accumulated substantial wealth. Yet, if your sole asset was your labor, if all you had to offer were your time and skills, you found yourself losing ground, as wages remained stubbornly stagnant. Consider this stark reality. From 1980 to 2020, worker productivity increased by a remarkable 70%. Corporate profits surged by over 400%. Meanwhile, real wages, adjusted for inflation, increased by a paltry 10%. Think about that. You are now working 70% more efficiently than your parents' generation, generating 70% more value for the economy, yet you are taking home essentially the same inflation-adjusted paycheck. Where, then, did that additional 60% of value disappear to? Directly to the very top, into the pockets of shareholders, executive management, and those who fundamentally own the assets. Here's a concrete illustration. In 1980, the average CEO earned approximately 40 times what the average worker made. Fast forward to today, and CEOs now command salaries over 350 times greater than that of the average worker. This astronomical disparity is certainly not because CEOs have become tenfold more effective at their roles. Instead, it stems from a significant shift in executive compensation, moving from traditional salaries to performance-linked stock options. These stock values, in turn, have absolutely exploded, fueled by aggressive money printing, corporate buybacks, and sophisticated financial engineering. Meanwhile, the essential workers who actually design and build the products, dutifully serve the customers, and ultimately generate the company's revenue, remain stuck with hourly wages that barely manage to keep pace with inflation. This, unequivocally, is wealth extraction by design. Those at the apex of the corporate hierarchy meticulously restructured their compensation packages to directly benefit from the ongoing asset inflation. Conversely, those at the bottom are confined to wages, and in an inflationary economic system, wages invariably lose out to appreciating assets every single time. Let's now turn our attention to access to credit, as this is where the inherent inequities of the system become truly insidious and profoundly impactful. Rich people borrow at 3%, while less affluent individuals are forced to borrow at 23%. This stark disparity in interest rates compounds into generational wealth for one segment of society, while simultaneously perpetuating cycles of poverty for the other. If you possess substantial wealth, if you have tangible assets that can be leveraged as collateral, financial institutions are more than willing to lend to you at extraordinarily low interest rates. You can secure a mortgage at 3% to acquire lucrative rental properties. You can obtain business loans at 4% to strategically expand your enterprise. You can even leverage your existing stock portfolio at a mere 2% to invest further into appreciating assets. Crucially, because asset prices consistently appreciate at a faster rate than your interest payments, you effectively make money simply by borrowing. This is the precise mechanism by which the affluent harness debt to amplify their wealth. They borrow inexpensive money, backed by appreciating assets, allowing inflation and asset appreciation to effectively pay off the loan, while they comfortably pocket the significant difference. However, if you are struggling financially, if you lack tangible assets, credit transforms from an opportunity into an inescapable trap. You need a reliable car to commute to work, necessitating a loan at 12% interest. Your furnace breaks down in the depths of winter, forcing you to resort to a credit card carrying a staggering 23% interest rate. You aspire to higher education, so you take out student loans that often become a lifelong burden, following you long after graduation. With every instance of borrowing, you are forced to pay a substantial premium, simply for the privilege of being poor. And that exorbitant interest? It's pure, unadulterated profit for the banks, profit that seamlessly flows upward to their shareholders and executive ranks. Let's make this concrete. A wealthy individual borrows $1 million at 3% to purchase an investment property. Their annual interest cost amounts to $30,000, but the property itself appreciates at 5% annually, generating $50,000 in value. This means they are effectively earning $20,000 per year, simply by leveraging borrowed money. In stark contrast, a less affluent individual borrows $20,000 on credit cards at a punitive 23% interest rate. Their annual interest cost alone is a burdensome $4,600. Furthermore, they are not acquiring an appreciating asset. Instead, they are purchasing essentials like groceries and car repairs, items that either rapidly depreciate in value or are consumed entirely. Thus, the affluent individual is effectively paid to borrow, while the struggling individual is relentlessly bled dry by debt. This is the infamous interest rate trap, undeniably one of the most potent mechanisms for wealth transfer embedded within the current economic system. Let's now turn our attention to taxation, because this is where the systematic extraction of wealth becomes entirely legalized. The prevailing tax code has been meticulously drafted by and for the wealthy, and it is overtly designed to tax labor, rather than accumulated wealth. If you earn your living through employment, you are subject to income tax, encompassing federal, state, and local levies, which rapidly accumulates. The average worker, astonishingly, relinquishes approximately 30% of their hard-earned income to taxes. However, if you are wealthy, if your financial gains primarily stem from investments, you pay capital gains tax, which currently peaks at a mere 20%. Already, you're paying significantly less. But the situation becomes even more egregious, as the truly ultra-wealthy often circumvent even capital gains taxes through a sophisticated strategy known as buy, borrow, die. Here's how it works. You own stocks worth, say, $100 million. Instead of liquidating these assets and incurring capital gains tax, you simply borrow against them. Banks are eager to lend you, say, $20 million at remarkably low interest rates, using your vast stock holdings as collateral. You then live comfortably off this borrowed money, which, critically, is not considered taxable income. Thus, you pay zero income tax and zero capital gains tax. Your opulent lifestyle is entirely financed by loans. Upon your passing, your heirs inherit these stocks at a stepped-up basis, meaning the original acquisition cost is legally reset to their current market value. This allows them to sell the stocks entirely tax-free. They then use these proceeds to effortlessly pay off your outstanding loans. The entire, colossal fortune is thereby transferred completely tax-free. This is precisely how billionaires routinely achieve lower effective tax rates than their own secretaries. It is entirely legal, widely practiced, and exclusively accessible to the ultra-wealthy. Meanwhile, you, the average worker, dutifully pay taxes on every single pound you earn. You cannot borrow against your projected future wages at a mere 2% interest rate. Nor can you pass on your hard-earned income to your children entirely tax-free. You are taxed at some of the highest rates on the most vulnerable form of wealth imaginable, your labor. And this, too, is intentional, as labor cannot be hidden away in offshore accounts. Labor cannot be sheltered within complex trusts. Labor cannot exploit sophisticated legal loopholes. You simply show up, you work, you get taxed. And that money, inevitably, flows upward. Let's journey back in history to observe this pattern with greater clarity. Consider the Gilded Age, from 1870 to 1900. During this era, a small coterie of industrialists, names like Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, and Vanderbilt, amassed fortunes so immense that they effectively controlled entire industries: oil, steel, banking, and railroads. They owned the very infrastructure of America, and everyone else simply worked for them. Wages were abysmally low, working conditions were often brutal, and child labor was a grimly common sight. There were no meaningful safety regulations, no minimum wage laws, and certainly no concept of overtime pay. When workers attempted to organize, to collectively demand better pay or improved conditions, the wealthy elite would frequently deploy private armies to violently suppress these strikes. The infamous Pinkertons essentially hired guns, literally shot workers in the streets. This wasn't simply capitalism. It was effectively a form of industrial feudalism, with wealth concentrated to levels unseen since the days of European aristocracy. It required decades of intense labor battles, widespread strikes, and ultimately, significant government intervention to dismantle these vast monopolies and forge a semblance of economic balance. The New Deal, the rise of powerful labor unions, and the implementation of progressive taxation. All these initiatives were expressly designed to counteract excessive wealth concentration, fearing it would ultimately undermine and destroy democratic principles. And for a significant period, it worked. From 1945 to 1980, economic inequality demonstrably decreased, the middle class flourished, and wages consistently rose in tandem with productivity. It marked the most economically egalitarian period in American history. However, the tide dramatically turned. Beginning in 1980, virtually every policy shift began to explicitly favor capital over labor. This included substantial tax cuts for the wealthy, aggressive union-busting tactics, widespread deregulation of the financial sector, and globalization policies that saw countless jobs outsourced overseas. Consequently, the wealth gap exploded. Today, we find ourselves reverting to Gilded Age levels of inequality. The wealthy now command a larger share of the nation's wealth than they did even in 1929, on the eve of the Great Depression. And just as in the Gilded Age, this concentrated wealth is being strategically deployed to purchase political power, systematically crush labor organizing efforts, and relentlessly rewrite the rules of the economy in their own favor. History, it seems, is not merely rhyming, but repeating itself. Yet, most people fail to recognize it because the mechanisms employed are far more sophisticated. Where Rockefeller wielded monopolies and hired guns, today's billionaires employ complex tax havens and powerful lobbying efforts. Different tools, perhaps, but the outcome remains chillingly identical. Wealth flows inexorably upward, power concentrates into fewer hands, and everyone else progressively falls further behind. Let us now address the role of crises, for it is during these periods that the process of wealth transfer accelerates with alarming intensity. Every significant economic crisis in modern history has consistently resulted in the rich becoming richer and the poor becoming poorer. Consider the financial crash of 2008. Banks engaged in reckless gambling with subprime mortgages, created highly toxic securities, and brought the global economy to the brink of collapse. Millions of ordinary people lost their homes, their jobs, and their life savings. Foreclosures ravaged entire neighborhoods, and retirement accounts were decimated. It was, by all measures, the worst economic disaster since the Great Depression. And what befell those who engineered this catastrophe? They received massive bailouts. The government printed trillions of dollars, effectively handing it directly to the banks. Taxpayer money flowed straight to Wall Street, which then shamelessly used these funds to snap up foreclosed homes at rock-bottom prices, for mere pennies on the dollar. Giants like BlackRock, along with numerous private equity firms and hedge funds, aggressively scooped up hundreds of thousands of houses at the very moment ordinary people were being evicted. And now, tellingly, those very firms are often your landlord, charging you rent on a house you might have once owned. The 2008 crisis stands as the largest upward wealth transfer in American history, and it was orchestrated, remarkably, with your own money. Then came 2020. The pandemic hit. The government shut down the economy and printed $6 trillion to keep it from collapsing. Some of that, certainly, went to stimulus checks, perhaps $1,200 or $2,000 if you were particularly fortunate. But the overwhelming majority of these funds were directed towards corporations and the financial markets. The stock market crashed precipitously in March 2020, only to have fully recovered by June. By the close of 2020, it had soared to unprecedented all-time highs. How was this possible? Because the Federal Reserve relentlessly pumped trillions into the system. They aggressively bought bonds, artificially propped up asset prices, and maintained interest rates at an effective zero. If you owned stocks, you became significantly richer. The wealthiest Americans collectively added over $1 trillion to their net worth during the pandemic. Billionaires, quite literally, enjoyed their best year ever. Meanwhile, millions of workers tragically lost their jobs. Countless small businesses were forced to shut down permanently. Renters fell into arrears and faced the threat of eviction. And then, inflation began its relentless ascent, steadily eroding whatever meager savings people had managed to retain. Once again, the crisis served to enrich the wealthy while further impoverishing everyone else. And once again, this was achieved through printed money that inflated asset values, simultaneously crushing the purchasing power of the average citizen. Observe the undeniable pattern. Every crisis adheres to precisely the same script. Something breaks, the government intervenes, money is printed in vast quantities. This money, invariably, flows to the top. Asset prices either recover or even soar to new heights. Yet, wages remain stagnant. Jobs do not fully return. And the people at the bottom are left grappling with mounting debt, relentless inflation, and ultimately, less than they possessed before. This is not a flaw in the system. This is how the system is designed to work. Crises are not hindrances, but rather opportune moments for concentrated wealth transfer. And those in positions of power are acutely aware of this. Let's talk about compound returns, because this is the mathematical engine of inequality. If you begin with, say, $1 million and achieve an 8% annual return, in just 10 years you will possess $2. 1 million. In 20 years, $4. 6 million. And in 30 years, a staggering $10 million. You, personally, did nothing beyond owning those assets and allowing them to relentlessly compound. Conversely, if you start with nothing, if your sole resource is your labor, you are confined to earning a linear income. You work, you get paid. You stop working, the money ceases. There is no compounding effect. And year after year, inflation steadily erodes your precious purchasing power. Consequently, the chasm between you and the individual who began with $1 million grows wider and wider, not because they are inherently smarter or work harder, but purely due to the immutable laws of mathematics. Compound returns on assets will always outpace linear income derived from labor. Always. This is precisely why inheritances hold such profound significance. It is also why overcoming the advantages of generational wealth is an almost insurmountable challenge. If your parents bequeathed you nothing, you are quite literally starting from zero. And even if you save with extraordinary aggression, even if you invest with remarkable sagacity, you will realistically never catch up to someone who began with $1 million. The very mathematics of the system will simply not permit it. Now, let's introduce another crucial layer, inflation. The government prints money, and that money directly inflates asset prices. Houses, stocks, gold, virtually everything appreciates in value. If you are fortunate enough to own these assets, you inexorably grow richer. But if you don't own them, if you're striving to buy your first home or meticulously save for retirement, everything suddenly becomes far more expensive. You are effectively priced out of the market, and the wealth gap widens yet again. This, fundamentally, is why the housing market is profoundly broken. In 1980, the median home price was about $64,000, while the median household income was around $21,000. A house, therefore, cost roughly 3 times your annual income. Today, the median home price exceeds $400,000, and the median income hovers around $75,000. A house now costs more than 5 times your annual income, but the situation is even more dire than that. While mortgage rates in 1980 were high, at approximately 13%, houses themselves were relatively affordable, meaning you could pay off your mortgage swiftly. Today, rates might be lower, but houses are so astronomically expensive that even at a seemingly modest 4% interest, your monthly payment is absolutely crushing. And you'll likely be committed to payments for 30 years or more, consequently spending a far larger percentage of your income on housing for a longer duration and building equity at a much slower pace. Meanwhile, those who already own property are witnessing their net worth explode. They purchased cheaply, and now their assets are worth millions. They did nothing to earn this. The system merely inflated the value of what they already possessed. Here's the brutal truth. The system is designed so that if you start with capital, you win. And if you start with only labor, you lose. Capital enjoys access to cheap credit, benefits from low taxes, and harnesses the power of compound returns. Labor, conversely, is burdened with expensive credit, high taxes, and restricted to linear income. Capital directly benefits from inflation. Labor is systematically crushed by it. Capital is inherently mobile, capable of relocating to wherever taxes are most favorable. Labor, however, is largely immobile. You cannot simply uproot your life and move to another country to circumvent taxes. Every single rule, every policy, and every crisis response is meticulously crafted to protect capital and, simultaneously, extract from labor. And it is the very people who own capital who wield the power to write these rules. They fund the politicians, they own the media, and they control the dominant narrative. Therefore, you are continuously told that inequality is a consequence of merit, of sheer hard work, or of individual choices. But this is a profound falsehood. It is, instead, about a system that unequivocally rewards ownership and systematically punishes honest work. So, what profound lessons should you glean from this understanding? First, comprehend that you cannot possibly out-earn a rigged system. Working harder will not, in itself, make you rich if the fundamental game is rigged to funnel your productivity directly to someone else. You must aim to own assets, not merely earn income. Secondly, recognize that debt is a potent weapon wielded against you. Expensive debt is designed to keep you impoverished. Cheap debt, conversely, if you can access it, possesses the power to build wealth. However, the system ensures that cheap debt is predominantly channeled to those who already possess significant capital. Thirdly, understand that the tax code is far from neutral. It is explicitly written to favor wealth over honest work. Therefore, either meticulously learn these rules yourself or hire an expert who understands them, because the wealthy are rigorously exploiting every available loophole. Fourthly, comprehend that crises are, in essence, wealth transfer events. The next one is an inevitability, and when it arrives, assets will be on sale. If you possess cash, liquidity, or access to cheap credit, you will be positioned to buy. If you don't, you will, regrettably, be the one forced to sell at a significant loss. Fifthly, acknowledge the profound importance of generational wealth. If you cannot inherit it, you are compelled to build it yourself. And that often necessitates significant sacrifice in the present to accumulate assets that will compound and grow in the future. History repeatedly illustrates this stark pattern. Wealth concentrates, the rich become richer, and the poor become poorer. This occurred in ancient Rome, in feudal Europe, during the Gilded Age, and it is undeniably happening once again, right now. The only instances where this trajectory was reversed were when workers collectively organized, valiantly fought back, and compelled the system to implement fundamental changes. The powerful labor movement of the early 20th century, the transformative New Deal, and the subsequent post-war economic boom, all these required immense struggle and sacrifice. None of these gains were freely given. And now, those hard-won gains are systematically being rolled back. Unions are weaker. Taxes on the wealthy are significantly lower. Wages remain stubbornly stagnant, and wealth is concentrating at an unprecedented pace. We are rapidly heading towards a new form of feudalism, a world where a minuscule elite owns virtually everything, and everyone else is relegated to renting, borrowing, and working tirelessly until their dying breath. Unless, that is, people finally awaken and collectively demand a fundamentally different paradigm. However, here lies the harsh reality. Most people, regrettably, will not. Because the system is extraordinarily adept at keeping you perpetually distracted, divided, and desperate. You are too preoccupied working 2 jobs simply to survive to even consider organizing. You are too deeply buried in debt to contemplate taking risks. You are too intensely focused on immediate survival to contemplate the larger systemic issues. And that, precisely, is how those in power want it. Because a populace relentlessly struggling simply to survive has neither the time nor the energy to effectively fight back. History may not repeat itself precisely, but its underlying patterns are undeniably unmistakable. The rich consistently grow richer because the system is inherently designed to concentrate wealth. The poor, conversely, become poorer because every single mechanism, be it credit, taxes, inflation, or crisis, serves to extract from the bottom and deliver directly to the top. This isn't a flaw. It is, in fact, the fundamental feature of the system. And until you grasp this profound truth, you will continue to participate in a game that you are structurally designed to lose. If this exposition has offered you a fresh perspective, please consider subscribing. History, it is said, holds the answers. I will endeavor to illuminate where precisely to look for them.